Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Magicians. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, Julia is kind of working to try and figure out this whole, because obviously, no words about the whole apocalypse that Home Dude brought up last episode, Pig Dude. The fact of the matter is, while that's happening, she's also trying to help figure out this whole, because I'm assuming the apocalypse thing might have something to do with this whole, the surges, because obviously a lot of people are blowing themselves up, and I think it's kind of interesting element to it, where it's now normal people, because that's it, normal people are starting to recognize, something's going on here, and I think that's interesting, because that's not really been an element throughout this entire series, very regular there are no non-magical people that really know. One of the few non-magical people we know that ever found out about magic being real and everything was Quentin's dad. But that's never really been an element in the show, so I'm curious to see whether that becomes a bigger thing or not. It might not, but it's just kind of an interesting detail for them to throw in there. But obviously it's more urgency to we got to fix this before regular people start finding out, yeah, something's up here. But interesting enough, the surges don't always, they come at very there's no set pattern to it. And so it's okay, so some stuff leads to people blowing themselves up, other things don't. So it's why is that? And I even love Fall being you would know about the circumstances and stuff like that, kind of being yeah, because despite kind of picking up stuff from the hedge witches and stuff like that, once again, Julia has never been formally trained, which is kind of crazy to think about everything that they've been through. I mean, it's almost interesting when you actually break it down, because they've never really been to school that often, considering everything that our main characters, all of the characters have been through over the course of this series. Not just Julia, literally everyone, but especially Julia, because she has no break bills training at all. So it's just stuff she picked up from hedge witches and stuff she kind of picked up from herself. So it's interesting. But it's he kind of accepts her saying no, but I think at the same time it's still hoping to get you at this school, because I mean obviously in the different timelines you came to this school, this is literally the one timeline you didn't. So almost trying to make up for that, because Fogg's always had it in his head of I got to make up for the fact is a lot of terrible stuff happened to you because I didn't accept you into the school because I thought you'd be better off. But obviously he kind of somewhat try to rectify that last season when they were living different lives as different people, that whole situation. So it's just kind of interesting to kind of think about it like that. But it's all right, the circumstances are affected by stuff like the water and the moon cycle and stuff like that. But there are other circumstances necessary to kind of, there are other levels of circumstances that kind of affect stuff like that. So it's if you want to kind of catch the pattern of it, let's go visit Professor X and I love you, the X-Men, which is that's such a cute response. I thought that was kind of adorable. But it's oh no, she's an ex-lover of mine, and I just call her that because she really doesn't like it at all. I was oh, that's neat. And it's and immediately she blows herself up, and he's I literally picked the worst. I think he said worst week. So it's oh, so you not drinking is super recent. And once again, to be fair, it's only been a month since season 4's finale, but it's oh, you didn't quit drinking the entire month. It's oh, you picked the worst week to stop drinking. So no wonder this is super fresh for you. Okay, no judgment. I just thought that was kind of an interesting little detail, but regardless. So now Julia has to go to Alice because she thinks Alice, would kind of know how to kind of, because she figured Alice might be able to kind of help her kind of figure out this circumstance, in which Alice's story plays out the way it does, which I think is really interesting with the whole situation of her obviously trying to bring back Quentin, and it works. I was kind of oh, it's not going to work. It's going to not work. I figured as much, but I was oh, is this? I was is it what? And there's a little kid. I'm and there's Quentin as a kid. I was not the circumstances you were hoping for. Interesting. Obviously he thinks it's a dream, and obviously she's checking everything because she's it doesn't make sense. She found this one page and she's okay, maybe this is, and I thought it was kind of sweet, that whole okay, at the very least I want to finish something for him, because the fact of the matter is it's look at this, this, she thought maybe he left it there for her to find, which I'm kind of wondering about that, but we'll circle back to that in a little bit. But it's hey, I want this to be, something that maybe Quentin wanted, he never got to finish, that maybe it's a letter that needs to be translated, or maybe it's just something he was working on. I just want to finish it for him. But sadly, 12-year-old Quentin can't read it. Obviously, Julia comes over, and Alice kind of hides it from her tries to, but obviously, I mean, she knew at first because she was like, oh god, because she knew obviously Julia, like, Julia and Quentin go back, they've been best friends since they were kids, so she would recognize Quentin immediately. And obviously she kind of chastises her because it's like, you literally made up this whole, well, for one, I love the whole aspect of like her and Quentin kind of talking. Quentin's like, hey, you kind of remind me of my friend, you remind me of someone, Julia, her grandma. And did you see Julia kind of get, it's a little, you see her kind of die a little inside. Oh, okay, sure, great. It's like, I'm not that old, but okay, sure. I guess from a 12-year-old's eyes, I'm an old lady or something. You just see that moment because someone like, oh, you were, oh, like, oh yeah, I'm your best friend Julia. Like, it's like, without saying it, you can see the light in her eyes first, like, oh, I'm your best friend Julia. And yeah, you remind me of Julia, her grandma. You could see her die a little on the inside. I thought that was kind of nice. But obviously, like, Julia kind of rips into Alice for doing this because it's like, why would you do that? The fact of the matter is, I want to do a seance and you decided not to. And obviously Alice tried to explain everything, but obviously Julia was pissed because it's like, you literally took a part of Q's soul to make this happen, so he can't even rest. Like, this is what you did was very selfish and stuff like that. I mean, to be fair, once again, it's a sad cycle that, him and Alice found themselves in, because like, he literally tried to do the same thing, he wanted to, see Alice and everything. I mean, well, especially because he kept seeing Alice kind of pop up and everything. That ended up being the whole thing. But regardless of all of that, she herself needed closure. But I did like, Julia being able to talk to, Quentin. Because I think the beautiful nature of it was like, this wasn't just for Alice in a sense. It was there for Julia too, to kind of give her closure, because Julia ends up talking to Quentin and it's like, oh, like, I have a friend who does that. Basically, when he finishes a book, he immediately starts it from the beginning because he doesn't like endings. And I'm like, dude, I totally relate. I literally never want anything that I like to ever end, so I can totally relate to that. But it's almost like, and it's actually this, like, there was actually a beautiful elegance to like how that's expressed, in the sense that like, when the book ends, it almost feels like your best friend is like leaving you behind. So it's like, if as long as you kind of go back to the beginning, it's almost like everything's okay again. And Julia talks about the fact is that she can, obviously she can relate, and obviously, and I thought that was kind of a neat element of her, because he's like, yeah, my therapist says that, this and that, but it's like, Julia being like, the fact of the matter is, your friends are always going to, be there for you, because he was worried about like his friends growing up and leaving him behind and stuff like that. He even referencing Julia. It's like, yeah, she's going to date some creeps who smoke and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, she will, but it'll be a phase. But she's always going to be there, always going to need you as her best friend and everything. I was like, oh, that was sweet. But like, I like that. But then like Julia had looked at spells, like, you didn't do anything wrong. The spell was enacted perfectly, but you didn't account for your circumstances, because the circumstances are like, yeah, in your head you're like, I need to bring back Q so he can translate this for me, but what was in your heart, it's not what you needed. So you ended up picking a Quentin that would kind of answer another thing for you, like, because, and I thought it was like how it kind of ties together. You're like Quentin. You rather kind of go to the beginning rather than the end, because if it was grown-up Quentin, that would just be, oh, the reminder, this is a Quentin that's going to end up dying. But if he's a kid again, like, she, psychologically took Quentin back to the beginning to a certain extent. And I was like, that's so interesting how you tie that together, because basically it's like the reason why he can't translate it for you, because that's not what he's here for. He's here to answer something else for you, and he won't, go back to, rest until you do. And so they kind of sit down and talk, and he's like, kind of realizes like, oh, this isn't a dream, is it? And it's like them talking and everything. It's like, obviously she's dealing with the fact is that, she expresses like she lost her friend, and it's like she's trying to figure out what to do with, the fact is he gave her a gift. That gift was his life, but then Quentin's saying like, the gift wasn't his life, it was yours. Like, the fact of the matter is, you're still alive. That's, it's like kind of up to Alice to kind of take that gift and do what she can with it. It's just that hard situation of she felt like she couldn't move on, but meeting younger Quentin, it's like I thought that was kind of neat because she's like, even at 12 years old, Quentin Coldwater is still the smartest person I know. I was like, I thought that was really sweet, and I think for her, it gave her an opportunity to actually get to say goodbye. She didn't get to say goodbye to Quentin. They kind of did, but this was kind of a much more personal thing. So I think Alice is going to be good. And obviously she helps out Julia because like, oh, here's a friend of my dad's who might be able to kind of help you figure out the pattern to this whole circumstance thing. But she puts away that letter from Quentin, or that thing that she needed to translate. I'm like, that's going to come back in some shape or form. Now, it's like, was Quentin the one that left that there? Or did someone sneak that in there to make you think that? But that might be, I'm sure that's going to be heavily plot relevant. All we see is our put it away. So no one can translate that for now. But, we'll see where the circumstances are different going forward. Because there's stuff in the episode that makes you go, okay, well, that could be. But regardless. Obviously, we should take, Katie and Pete's story because it's like, oh, yep, no luck finding that book depository that ended up disappearing. Katie meets Eugene in a bar and it's like, oh, they bang it out and just kind of like, okay. But obviously, things are kind of weird for Katie because it's like, wait, Penny starts bringing up stuff. She's like, wait, what? I spent the entire day looking to the book stuff. I don't know what you're talking about. She doesn't remember anything. So it's like, okay. So she tracks down Eugene, and I love later on, he's like, wait, you drugged me to see if I drugged you? Because the fact of the matter is, I love him being like, oh, the fact of the matter is, like, if I drugged you, I wouldn't be here right now. I wouldn't be asking for, like, a second date and stuff like that. He's like, the fact of the matter is, you remind me of someone, you remind me of my, like, cousin. Yeah, my first cousin. Well, the fact of the matter is, my mom and her mom are twin sisters, so it's almost like my half sister, which makes it weird. And he's just like, and then he's like, I swear I didn't do anything to you. I mean, did some stuff to you. I mean, on you, the sex stuff. He's like, damn this true serum. I love that. But then Eugene's like, no, I'm missing time too. So it's like, all right, let's try. Working with Penny, they try to figure it out. I even love the fact is that they go to the bar and everything. And then it's like, oh, let's go to where we were having sex. And he's like, if you want me to, I can look away. And she's like, obviously, if we're here, that means you remember it. Because I even love him being like, this is like memory VR. It totally is. Can you talk about it? It's not. But regardless, it's actually kind of sad because I was like, oh, like Eugene going to be a new buddy or something? No, because it turns out Eugene is a sleeper agent. He looked at a card, something happened. I was like, oh, did he get possessed or something like that? Because obviously we've seen like gods possess people over the course of the show. Like when, like I think it was, wasn't it Persephone that was trying to talk to Julia? I think she kept, well, not just her. It was but we've seen people get possessed is kind of the point. I was wondering, like, oh, was it kind of something similar to that? Whether it was like a higher being, like I was wondering about that, but it was like a memory erasing spell, and Katie's like, what the hell? And then it turns out Eugene was meeting a friend, but that friend showed her a card. Katie shows him that card. It's like a top hat, and he goes into sleeper agent mode and they fight. And it's interesting because it turns out he kind of does it to himself because like, who am I to really have that on my conscience? And it's like, by having a conscience, it tells you not to do stupid crap like this. Like it would prevent you from doing stuff like this. But it's like he's legitimately an all Maturian candidate and stuff like that, wiping his memories so he has no idea what he does. Like, so the other Eugene, that's why it didn't work, the truth serum, because he actually didn't remember what he did. So that's interesting because at the same time, it's like, okay, so there's definitely a bigger part to play in this because later on, because obviously the lady that gave him that card, also the lady who went home with Pete and kind of wiped his memory as well. So they're both kind of candidates to kind of wipe your memory and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, so there, and even to the point he ends up killing himself just so that he doesn't end up telling Katie anything that could, lead to figuring this whole thing out. But it's like, who is behind all this? Because for one, you have to be pretty damn powerful to make an entire depository like that disappear, especially considering the library put like a whole bunch of wards on it to kind of make it so impossible to take. So, and now it's like someone's so desperate to make sure no one finds out what's up, they're wiping memories. So it's like, okay, we're going full-blown conspiracy here. That's interesting. But obviously, like, this is a lot for Katie because it's like, for her, she thought like maybe like, taking on this responsibility. Like I think Katie is trying to feel kind of like, sadly, like Katie's kind of broken on the inside because just so much shit's happened that, Katie kind of is trying to compensate without using some, external thing as a crutch, much like Eugen's case of like to kind of keep himself together, like so he can do his job without it being compromised by like having to on a regular basis weigh himself down with all that he does. He wiped his memory. So for her, she thought it's almost like being a hedge witch was kind of like the head of the hedge witches was supposed to kind of be like her crutch of kind of like I can help people, but now it kind of acts as a double-edged sword because it's like she's like, when I slipped, I wasn't pissed at myself, I wasn't disappointed, I was just kind of almost relieved, because now it's this thing of like it's almost like she's naturally looking for an excuse just to kind of relapse and continue relapsing, and it's just kind of like it's like if I need a crutch to do this job, then maybe I shouldn't do this job in the first place. And Penny kind of reaches out for her. She's like, I'm sure, because it's like you're still Penny 23, you're not my Penny. So I'm wondering, is that going to play in shape or form? I mean, because what did Penny 40 say last season that Katie? He kind of makes it seem like Katie was going to be okay, like, and it seemed like that season she was, but I think that still kind of applies to this season. But I'm curious to see, is Penny 23 going to try and help her in that regard by bringing Penny 40 here to kind of help her in that? I don't know. But it's just that thing of like you look like my ex, and obviously that's something I still kind of have to process and deal with. But the fact is, like, you being there for me, like, that's not going to make things better. Like, it's something she's obviously got to figure out on her own. So there's that side of things. Then there's everything in Fillory with Elliot going to visit Jane Chatwin. So it's like interesting because if I remember correctly, Margot went to visit her in season 3. She went to see her in season 3. So it's interesting that like it's almost checking off the list of people who have come to visit her. And the moment she sees Elliot, she's like, oh great, of course, what do you want now? Because it's like every time she turned around, like one of the main characters is coming to pop up, but it's a whole conversation about trying to go back in time. But obviously for Jane, it's the thing of like, if you go back in time and change anything, it could undo all of this. That's sadly the problem. It is because at first she was like, oh, where's my, basically referencing Quentin, and it's like, oh, he died, and you see her kind of brokenhearted because for her it's almost, because she ends up talking about the fact that it's the first time she met Quentin, and it's like, and she was like, yeah, he came to Fillory because he was dealing with his best friend's death. I was like, what? I don't, and he was like, right, Julia, and it's like, no, she was talking about him, and it was like, right, I had to remind myself, it's like, right, Jane and Fogg are the only ones that remember every timeline. So I was like, right, so she was referencing the first time, and it was actually interesting because it's like, because of his vices, I guess it ended up like killing him, Elliot. So that was interesting. It turns out Jane actually says the first thing she changed for the first timeline, going from timeline 1 to timeline 2, was making sure that Elliot stayed alive. Because it's like, maybe, if Elliot was still alive, then maybe Quentin would be more prepared for what needed to be done to fight the beast in Fillory. But, but it seems like all 39 timelines, he died. She was hoping that this timeline would be different, especially because it was like, oh, he beats the beast and everything. So she was kind of hoping like things would be different, but sadly, it ended up being another timeline where he died. But it's like, hey, we should bring him back in some shape. But it's like, no, we can't, because if we bring Quentin back, it could compromise. Because the fact is, he's already done what he's supposed to do. Same thing for your friend Finn and Josh. Like, we should just let the dead stay dead. And and I think that's going to be an overarching story arc for because obviously like. Alice is kind of dealing with that. Obviously, Julia's still kind of processing that, and obviously Elliot. It's interesting because it's actually interesting, and I think there's actually a beautiful message behind that of like how 3 different people are dealing with their grief. I mean, actually even 4 if you count Margot, because she's dealing with the whole Joss and Finn situation as well. So it's kind of lost on many different regards. So I think that's kind of interesting, and so Jane doesn't want to help in that regard. It's like, time is a motherfucker, she says. Because it's actually kind of sad because like Elliot ended up running into Finn's ghost. And she's like, Elliot, he's like, oh, you can see me. She's like, yeah, of course. The fact that she's like, I might be dead. I might be a ghost, but that's no need to be rude and whatnot. And it's like, oh, and I love her kind of breaking it down, being like, well, basically she was like, well, the fact of the matter is I wasn't that good of a queen. I mean, the fact of the matter is, plenty of people yelled at me, but if a lot of people are yelling at it, then obviously they can't all be wrong, right? And I was like, right. And then she was like, so they decided to hang me, and I'm like, peace out, bitches. Fin out, bitches. And it was just kind of like morbidly funny. And then the whole situation of like, I was kind of hoping that someone come save me, because she's like, well, I knew, the last thing I heard, you were still possessed and everything. And so I figured that, well, after that was all said and done, you'd probably be like, drinking yourself silly. So I was hoping, maybe Margot would help, or Quentin, or Alice, or, Dean Falk, like someone would come save her. And it's kind of sad that, she was holding out for hope. And even more crushing for Elliot, it's like, she's like, oh, because she's like, well, I know my husband pretty well. And it's like, he's like, yep, it seems like you do know me very well, because the fact is she knew how he handles, situations like that. So, and it probably makes him feel even more guilty. And then it's like, oh, are you going to save me? Are you going to do are you going to use magic to turn back time? And it's like, please, the crows are coming. And then her skin starts kind of decaying, like going through the process of like how she died, and he's like, okay, almost like, geez, don't rush me. Like, almost like, geez, okay. It's like, I feel guilty enough. But he ended up stealing stuff from Jane, and Jane's like, well, shit. So he goes to Margot, and I love that their process to try and figure out everything. I was like, okay, so let's spray our stuff with this stuff, because it's pretty smart. This way, we don't get wiped out of existence trying to change time. Pretty smart measure to be taken. But then it's like, all right, and then like it's like, oh, the bees, there's talking bees and stuff like that. We can use them to get a message to Josh, because because Margot was like, Josh, all he ever did, he would never shut up about the bees. And they try it out, and the letter that Josh had left her, which was super sweet, because we ended up finding out that basically Josh and Finn had kind of shirked their responsibilities when it came to this whole Takers situation, because they were still because it's like they couldn't get back to Earth, because apparently like the rabbits were so like scared because of something that happened. Maybe it was like the surge of magic or whatever, but for whatever reason they wouldn't go, even despite the whole cigarette thing, which I'm like, right, I keep forgetting that, because it's like they introduced that last season. I don't think they'd introduced that because like I think last season was the first time they introduced like that's how you bribe the rabbits. They love cigarettes, which also kind of explain their voices, because they got like raspy voices, like, oh, those are they have smoker voices. Interesting. I didn't even really correlate that till now, just because of like how like raspy the rabbit's voice is, regardless of, once again, tangents and stuff like that. But it's like, because of that, everything that happened, that kind of explains like why they kind of got dethroned and everything, is because they weren't handling things like they were supposed to, because they were too distraught of like, oh, we got to find out what's going on with our friends, we got to find out like we know what happened to Elliot, we got to find our way to get Margot here, trying to figure those things out. So that led to their execution and everything, which is sad. And then there's the whole situation of like, okay, we tried the beast situation, but it turns out Josh is allergic. It's like, wait, did Josh say that he's allergic? And then Marco's like, that's why he wouldn't shut up about the bees. And then Elliot's like, well, that didn't work. And she kind of looks at him like, and this is almost messed up. This is the man you love, and you didn't It's like, right, that's why he wouldn't shut up about the bees, because he's allergic. It's like, oh, not the best, Margot. And it's interesting because Elliot's dealing with, obviously, he's grieving in his own manner, and he kind of takes his process and kind of uses it against Margot, saying like, the fact of the matter is you're so desperate to save Josh, because they try to be like, okay, because Finn had listened to the bees, she tried to attack, but it kind of saw her as like she's crazy, like unsubstantiated reasons for kind of attacking. They end up dethroning her, killing her again. So it's like, it's almost, and then you see it kind of get repeated when they actually like tell them, all right, deal with the Takers immediately, because they use these stamps that make it so that you could send a letter despite the time and place. So let Finn and Josh know. And I love Josh being like, I told you we should be taking care of that stuff. And Finn's like, shut up. So they try to get rid of the Takers, and it's like, yay, we won. But then the Takers infiltrated, killed everyone. The Dark King ended up there. And that's why I kind of start thinking like, oh, maybe this is sadly written in stone. It's like, well, Quentin ends up ultimately dying. It's not the same circumstances, but it's almost like his fate to kind of die anyway. But, this one timeline, things kind of changed. But I was like, maybe sadly, like Finn and Josh are meant to die, sadly. I was like, maybe there's no change in that, because time is always going to find a way to kind of compensate for that. But Elliot was kind of like, you need to kind of let go, because the fact of the matter is you're doing this out of love and stuff like that. Like, while I was gone and everything, you needed someone there, and Josh was that person. But for her, he almost makes it seem like, it's just because of like, oh, like you're kind of almost like dick obsessed, like, oh, like he was just kind of like something to kind of deal with your sadness and stuff like that because he was there, and you're not, Margot doesn't really get caught, he's kind of thinking like she doesn't get caught up in her feelings, so it's like you're doing this trying to save Josh and stuff like that, but for her it's like, it seems like I can't save Josh and the kingdom, so she kind of has to choose one, and the one she ended up choosing was Josh, because it isn't just kind of like no, she legitimately fell in love with him, you know. So I thought that was sweet, because I think Elliot, because the last time Elliot remembers Margot really was Margot in season 3, so he wasn't there to experience that love story of Josh and Margot's, to kind of go through what they go through. So it's like he doesn't recognize that. Plus, like I said, he's dealing with his own stuff, which even she's kind of like, yeah, I recognize you. You know, you're still dealing with your own crap, and you're kind of like taking your crap and kind of making me to kind of have to fit along those lines of like how I should handle, you know, grief and stuff like that, which is ironic. He's not really properly handling his grief, and he's telling her that. But what she ends up doing is sending him a letter and everything. So I thought that was interesting, saying that, you know, telling him what's coming, because Elliot was like, you tell them just to run, which, you know, she's like, because initially she was like, I told him to stay here so that we can communicate back and forth and try and find out a way to deal with this Dark King situation, because he ends up using one of the stamps himself, like without even questioning, like he tried to warn Quentin. We'll get to that in a second. But the fact of the matter is, it turns out Josh and Finn read the letter, but rather than, at first I was like, is this Elliot messing with her? I was like, oh man, it's Elliot. It's like, oh, this is him trying to make her process her grief or something like that. It's like, oh no, it really is Josh. Holy shit, everyone's here, because they were like, well, we'll decided to come to the future, and seeing how, everyone else was kind of like, well, no one else wanted to stay considering what was coming. So, hey, we came, like literally everyone from the castle came to the future. It's like, yay! That's awesome. It's like, yay, so none of you are going to stay back there and get brutally murdered. Yeah, that's awesome. It's like, yay, that's so cool. I feel so good. And it's like, Margot and Josh are reunited. But then it's like, then we get that reveal at the end. Elliot hadn't sent the letter yet. I was like, oh, I thought you would have sent that immediately, but I think it's because he was still thinking about it, and seeing how things changed, that Margot ended up changing things. I think it starts Elliot thinking like, and at the end we don't see if he actually sends the letter or not. Now that's the actual interesting thing. The note that page that Alice has, I'm wondering, does it correlate to this? Because that could actually mean something, because what if he gives that letter to Quentin and Quentin does change? Like, you never know the ripple effects of what that can imply if, you know, Quentin knows what ends up happening, because he's sending the letter to Quentin before he went to the scene and everything. But then the question becomes, does he still do the same thing anyway, or does he try to find a way to both survive and, you know, because dying kind of gave him a different perspective. Because even when he dies, remember what he said in season 4's finale? He couldn't know whether or not he died to save his friends, or whether it's because he finally found a way to kill himself, because he sadly had been trying to do that so much of his life. But in the end, Penny kind of tells him, like, no, this is what you've left behind. Your friends have become better. They are better because of you in their life. Death was able to give him that perspective. What if Quentin doesn't have that perspective, you know? I mean, which is even sadder, because you think about, like, the fact of the matter is, like, Alice was able to kind of save him because she read the end of his book, because he was supposed to die by the beast. And, you know, you never know how things are going to ripple out, because Quentin, not by the beast, but by the monster inside of Elliot, obviously, so that changed. So it's like, what kind of changes would happen if Elliot sent it? Maybe he actually doesn't. Maybe he keeps it. Maybe Margot I don't know. But that's the thing of, like, you never know. Like, and I'm curious, because, like, some people have kind of thrown out some theories, like, at the end of season 4 of, like, what certain things could mean, like, about this Dark King situation, what that could be. And I'm wondering, does it kind of relate? Because there's some people who have thrown out some theories about that. But regardless, we'll see. Maybe it's completely disconnected. Maybe it's all connected. It's going to be interesting, because, like, I think it's really neat. Like I said, like, different people are handling their grief in different ways. And remember what Stephanie told Alice. It's like, if you need to do something crazy, you do something crazy, because no one can tell you how to grieve. And Alice did what she did. Now you're kind of thinking, well, Elliot's kind of basically doing the same thing. He's doing something crazy. So, you know, so it's interesting how that all really connects like that. I think that's really neat how they're handling that. So I'm very, very curious to see where all this ultimately ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.